Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're back for part 2 of the discussion of the offense. And joining us again is Childs Walker of the Baltimore Sun. Childs, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Ken. Thanks for having me.
I promised people who are listening to the first show that the first thing we talk about this show was something that interests me greatly, but I'd love to hear your process, and I think other people would love as well. You know, we obviously watch camp together some, and there is a furious amount of information happening, particularly when there's multiple drills on the field. But even when it's just 11-on-11 play going, they're trying to keep the pace very quick, and they try much quicker than a game type pace most of the time. It's almost like you're running no huddle constantly, and they try and run as many plays as they can. And I've always seen reporters come to camp with these small little, I don't know what I would call them, address book sized note-taking things that I would find wholly insufficient in terms of getting that. But I wanted to get inside, what is your process, either in camp or at a game, in terms of taking notes when you're on deadline?
Yeah, part of that I'll tell you is practical, because they give us those little notebooks in bulk, and so that's just we're working with the tools we're given. As we were talking about this in the production meeting a little bit. I mean, I have colleagues who some of them use wider notebooks, and they take extremely detailed notes during camp. Chart every play. Chart Lamar Jackson's statistics for each practice. I'm a little looser than that. I'm more I make a note of basically any play that catches my eye, with a brief description, so that if I'm writing observations for that day, or if I'm going to write about that player in the next few weeks, I have it to go back to. I'm usually not charting every play in camp unless I'm focusing in on a specific player for a piece that week. Then I might have a real hyper focus radar on that player. Now games is kind of a different story. I mean, because I'm going to be writing a fairly comprehensive piece on deadline, which means I'm probably going to have an hour and a half or two to write immediately after we get up from talking to the players in the locker room. In that case, I almost have to be taking notes in my story file throughout the game. So I'm typing, I'm trying to type an evocative description of just about any play that stands out to me that I think might be important to the story of the game. And I know you said you do a version of this as well. I want to, because I don't have the opportunity to go back and watch video as I'm writing my story, I want to have, an accurate, catchy description of the play already down, so that when I go back to write about it, it's there in my mind's eye, as quickly as possible. So that's basically what I'm doing throughout the game. And then, as I start to, as we get into, say, the third quarter, and you start to have a better sense of what the main themes of the game are going to be, I start to pick through those plays and see, what fits the story of this game, what's important, what needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. And then I start to flesh out and, make those connections as we get closer to the final gun. So, I mean, that's basically how it works.
Okay, that's a fascinating process. I try and write things that are of a sort of similar vein. I'll have 3 or 4 lead items I'm writing about. Now you have 5 things, which is very right. Well written, very very interesting pieces. One of the pieces I really look forward to on a weekly basis in the Sun, and it really does a good job of tying those things together. You don't have one additional day for that, right? That's the very day after the game.
I mean, I'm writing it immediately after the game, and then it goes up at 5 a.m. then the next day. That's how it works. But I mean, like, especially a Thursday night game, we go down to the locker room, talk to the players after the game. So getting back up to the press box at probably 12:15, 12:20 a.m. Don't want my editor staff to be up literally until sunrise. So I'm hoping to file that piece by probably about 2 a.m., 2:30. So yeah, I mean, I'm having to put all that together, in a pretty tight window, which unfortunately means you don't get as much into the real detailed, film breakdown kind of analysis of plays. Would love to be able to do that. Would love to have time to do it. Can't really do that under those circumstances. So, it has to be a little more fluid, as I described.
All right. And are you the one still who is writing the previews for the game? I don't see a byline on that anymore. I'm wondering if that's collected information.
No, I still do the scouting. I still do the scouting report. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So there, by that time, you've had a little more chance to do some other review of all 22 or whatever you want, I'm assuming.
Yeah, right. By that time, I've had the chance to really sit down and, I mean, we've had our breakdown with John Harbaugh on Monday afternoon, which is a good chance to go through the game with him. And then, yeah, we'll sit and do a detailed rewatch of the game and take notes all over again on either Monday or Tuesday.
All right. All right, outstanding stuff. I always process whenever we can get into it with whatever guest is just always very interesting to me. How about we talk about the offensive line a little bit here?
Yep.
I just start out at a high level. The offensive line, usually like looking at the total number of negative events gives you a good idea of what the grades are going to look like to start with. But they were responsible for 1.5 of the 3 sacks, as I saw it, 2 of the quarterback hits, 4 pressures, which isn't bad against a team like the Bengals. And this was where they kind of fell down a little bit. 3 penalties, 1 false start, and 2 offensive holdings in this game.
Yeah, I guess maybe we should start out talking about Patrick McCary, because he was obviously in the spotlight, blocking Trey Hendrickson, and with Ronnie Stanley not in the game. So I mean, he was out there at left tackle, and he had certainly an uneven game with some of the the sack that he allowed early and the penalties. So what was your grade on him?
Yeah, so he certainly didn't fare as well the second time around. He had was actually his second best game of the season in that Week 2 matchup versus Cincinnati, and he was in there at left tackle for Ronnie Stanley then as well. He allowed contributions to 5 pressure events in this game, so parts of 3 pressures, including 1 full one, a half a quarterback hit, 2/3 of a sack. Actually, that sack, he was beaten pretty badly, but Moses also helped phone booth the pocket. I think Lamar might have escaped otherwise had that not happened. So I gave a third of the sack to Moses on that play. Missed 5 blocks. 2 of those were losses at the line of scrimmage. That's not too bad. You want to avoid the times where you're getting beat by the man directly opposite you. That's just the basic thing about football. If you pull and you miss a block, or you go into level 2 and you can't find a block, those are much less serious misses. So that's okay. 4 blocks in level 2, 1 pancake, 3 out of 3 on pulls, 2 nice highlight blocks. C-. He had duplicated his worst game of the year against the Browns. Really had a lot of trouble in that game. And it was nice to see him kind of bounce back. And frankly, McCary's been all over the place in terms of his grades, including 2 bad games against the Browns. But given the pass rushers the Ravens will face, I think if he could be kind of a C- player for the rest of the year, that'd be pretty terrific for the Ravens. It would be even better if Ronnie Stanley came back. But if he were a levelized C- player, the Ravens could work with that.
Right. And then I guess let's talk about the other tackle, Morgan Moses. He was obviously back after 2 games away with the shoulder injury, and we had talked in part 1 about is he actually maybe the Ravens' most valuable tackle at this point? From my view, had a solid game, but how did you grade it?
Yeah, he's outscored Ronnie Stanley on the year, as we kind of hit on briefly, by a fair amount. So I think he has been the Ravens' most valuable tackle this year. 4 pressure event shares in this game. It wasn't too bad because there's a lot of partials. 1.33 pressure, so 1 1/3, and a third of a quarterback hit, a third of a sack. Again, as I mentioned with McCary, because he shared that. He had 4 blocks missed, but none of those were losses at the line of scrimmage. So that's really good. 3 of those were L2 whiffs on Wilson, so something where he had to go up and either hit Wilson in level 2 in some ways. I can't remember one that was specifically a seal, but he did not get it done in terms of getting to Wilson on 3 different plays. 3 blocks in level 2 though, 1 pancake, 3 out of 4 points on pulls, 1 highlight combination block, B- after adjustment. He is playing as well as any Ravens offensive tackle right now, so that's positive. They can't be without him, but I guess more importantly, 2024 is looming. He's in the final year of his contract. I think the Ravens are maybe at a decision point here about potentially extending him. I don't think there's any way they'll let him go. I think he's playing for the Ravens in 24. He's playing out his contract, but you don't get any sense that he might be retiring or considering retirement, do you?
No, I do not. I mean, he's given every indication that he feels he's playing at a high level, wants to keep going. I mean, he obviously he's missed 2 games this year, or is it 3 now? Either 2 or 3, and hadn't for a long time before that, but takes a tremendous amount of pride in his physical preparation and durability. So no, I think I think his plan is certainly to keep going. And I agree. I mean, he has turned out to be a low key, very important signing because he's given them exactly what they were hoping for when they got him, which is, real solidity on that side of the line, which we know they had previously lacked. So I guess moving on with the offensive line, you had mentioned the penalties, the two holding penalties, obviously both John Simpson. How much did that lower his grade for the game?
Yeah, kind of a significant hit to him. And he had 5 straight games without a flag, which that's been the bugaboo for Simpson his whole career. And unfortunately, them returning after a couple of weeks off, he's still kind of at or a little bit above his career rate for flags, which was very, very high in Las Vegas. Half a pressure, 1 full quarterback hit. So it's not really about the negative events as much as it's about these damn holding penalties. The first one was on Reeder, and he's probably going to get beat. So, it wasn't a terrible hold in that case. The other one was on Jordan Battle, and Jordan Battle was blitzing through, I believe it was the B gap. I think he was in the process of, yes, it was. He was in the process of helping Linderbaum on his double team, and he's responsible for coming off. Well, he kind of saw Jordan Battle late, reached out his left arm, and held. He knew it right away. He went to the ground, and he didn't even have to look up for the flag. He's beating on the ground and mad at himself about it. Most of his issues with holding calls throughout his career have been what I will call standard run block holding calls, where he is blocking inside the frame and doesn't give up in time when the player gets outside the frame and the running back gets outside of the box, kind of outside of the tackle box. Which has been an ongoing problem, but this one is a new one on me. For him to reach out with his left arm and try and make a block on a blitzing safety. So a little tough on that. 3 missed blocks, 1 loss at the line of scrimmage. That's a good relationship between those two. He made 6 out of 8 pulls. I felt like I was being a little too nice to him on some of his pull blocks, like they weren't really as high quality as the 6 out of 8 would let you believe. 1 level 2 block, 1 pancake. No highlight in this game, and a D. It's actually his lowest graded game of the season overall. Now you look at this on PFF, they won't have as big a bad a grade on him, but the penalties weigh very heavily on his score for me. I would go into that, but we'll do that on another show. I kind of plan to talk to someone specific about that in terms of why penalties are so much relative to other events.
Yeah. Right. I guess on a brighter note, Kevin Zeitler is back to playing at a consistently pretty high level after an uneven start to the season. Did he continue that in this game by your reckoning?
Absolutely. And I want to ask you at the end of this what the feeling was among the beat writers on what was wrong with Zeitler. Do we have to be very worried about this over this first 3 weeks of the season? But he's now 6 of the last 7 games he's played very well. 3 partial pressures in this game, a contribution, a third of each of a pressure, a quarterback hit, and a half sack. 1 missed block, 1 loss at the line of scrimmage, so not bad at all. 5 out of 5 on pulls. 3 blocks in level 2, 2 pancakes, 2 highlight combination blocks. That's the kind of game you get from Zeitler on a regular basis, these high mobility games where he's just not staying in his place, making his block time after time, and going through the dance steps there. He's actually having to move out in space and make some blocks. Bottom of the A range after adjustment, even with those various plays. But I want to go back to the point is, where were the beat writers at the beginning of the year in terms of their concerns over Zeitler and the fact that he might have lost something to Father Time?
Yeah, I would say it was just surprise more than anything else, because there hadn't been any indication of anything in camp or anything like that. He's kind of the classic player where you feel like you almost don't have to think about him because he's so dependable and he's just going to be out there and be good more often than not. At the same time, because of that, I think the tendency was to give him the benefit of the doubt and, think that he would probably work through it because there didn't seem to be anything physical. And, sure enough, he's pretty much showed that he deserved to have the benefit of the doubt, right? So I wouldn't say there was any sense of panic, but there was a little bit of, what's going on here? You always wonder that with a veteran player who's started as many games as he has. But he works so hard, both on the craft and to keep at the level that he is athletically. And he certainly seems to have the sense that he can keep going for quite some time. So it would have been surprising if there was a sudden drop off.
the Ravens, he talked to the Ravens, I think, before the season started, really asking for an extension, I think was the
Right.
idea. And this is a good situation for him. Obviously, that he's got here around other talented offensive linemen, an organization that really values offensive line play and probably has a lower chance of running into the same discontinuity foibles that people who don't coach offensive line well will run into. Do you get the sense of the term of deal that he would be looking for? Would he be looking for another 3-year extension to what's going on? Or do you feel like he's looking for a series of final 2 to make 1 deals, kind of like we had with Yanda, Reed, Mason, some other guys? Yeah.
My sense is that that's the most likely scenario. I have not heard him talk about that in any level of detail. I think that's probably what they would be looking for, and it would make sense at this point in his career. You do get the sense that he would like to stay here for all the reasons you just laid out. It's a good situation for him. I think they would probably like that as well. So I think they'll be in discussions.
All right. Well, that'd be interesting because if he's lost, and I honestly think there's a pretty good chance that Ravens just have too many other things they need to deal with price wise or cap wise that to get Zeitler in there. And they also, they have Voorhees next year, who could be a very practical alternative to Zeitler as the player. Boy, all I can say is I hope we're right about Voorhees and that he's as good as we are projecting him to be, because a lot of the hope of the Ravens, beating this tsunami of a UFA situation they have coming up this offseason is dependent on Voorhees stepping in and some other players as well, but Voorhees being one of them.
It is. And obviously if you can't count on having Zeitler back, you're really talking about 2 guard spots and not just 1, right? Because it's not it's not like the left guard spot's not going to be up for competition next summer. I mean, Simpson has been fine and he's been out there as a sturdy starter, but I don't think it's not like he has that position locked down. So, I mean, you're really, as I said, you're talking about 2 spots.
Yeah. And we're going to discuss this more, by the way, on our show on Friday morning GM, because went over the defense. We're going to go all over every offensive spot. So I don't want to take too long in this game, but Simpson is also a free agent himself. So while I think there's not a tremendous market for him, and I think the Ravens will have a chance to re-sign him, I think he's just one of the options. I don't think he's the option based on what we've seen so far. That could change over the next 10 weeks. That could change, but I think he's not an obvious choice at this point.
So that leaves us with one more offensive lineman to get to, and that's I guess the guy who's become the star of the line in a lot of ways, Tyler Linderbaum. Is starting to get more and more talk as a Pro Bowl candidate, and I know he received another very strong pass blocking grade from PFF. What did you make of his performance?
Well, that's the biggest thing, is that Tyler Linderbaum last year was a very bad pass blocker who was a very good run blocker, and the PFF mixed grade weights that 85-15 towards the run blocking. And I don't want to get into everything about that because I've talked about this with other people from PFF about it, but it's an enormous overweight to run blocking. And pass blocking is always the more important thing. So what I would say, and you mentioned Brandon Stevens earlier as being the biggest single surprise, and I would agree with that, by the way, but Tyler Linderbaum's improvement as a pass blocker is the most important single thing on the offense, at least. I mean, he was terrible, and now he's good, and that's an enormous jump. In fact, he's more than good. He's very good this year. Overcome, some size limitations. Now we have seen some targeting recently. There was a bad play against the Browns where he really got overwhelmed in the middle of the field. But generally, his anchors look pretty good. He came to camp heavier this year. I think he's probably given up a little bit as a run blocker. And I know people are going to say I get crucified for any kind of Tyler Linderbaum comment usually, but his run down field. And some of the runs he's done on screen blocking, whatnot, been tremendous. But the rundown field where he knocked Jordan Brooks into left field twice on the same play looked really good. I still think he's probably given up a little bit of his quickness to put on more weight. But I think it's clear that trade-off has really paid off for him. And he really is. It's a very close competition between him and Zeitler for the best Ravens offensive lineman right now. Zeitler's probably playing at a more consistent high level the last 7 weeks. Linderbaum although he was hurt. It has probably put together a few higher high points than Zeitler. And this was one of them. He only had 6 missed blocks in this game, no negative events. Only 2 of those were losses at the line of scrimmage. So all the others were level 2 no block or slipped entering level 2, which sometimes that's a shed. I have to be real careful about looking at that. But I think this was a slip in this game. 3 level 2 blocks, 2 out of 3 on poles, 0 pancakes, 1 highlight combination block, an A overall. So it was I believe it was his second best game of the year, but it might have even been his best. It was right there. I'm going to look just real quickly before I say this. It looks like it was his second best game of the year, just a tick behind the Tennessee game for being there. So anyway, outstanding game from Linderbaum. Really happy to see him playing well after a couple of mediocre weeks these last 2.
Yep. So on to the skill guys, right?
Yeah, on to the skill guys. So let's talk about it. You know the rules now. Who do you want to talk about first?
Well, I guess we talked about Lamar a good bit, and we talked about Keaton Mitchell a good bit, right? So should we do Gus Edwards? Yeah,
please.
Okay. Well, we've talked about how good his vision has been at the goal line this year, and how that's been a major factor in their success in the red zone. One of the best red zone teams in the league. But I did think that the 26-yard run to start their offense in the second half was a reminder of how effective he can be in other ways. He's not just a straight ahead bull, as I think he was probably maybe misperceived to be in his first couple of seasons in the league. I mean, he does have the ability to make some impressive cuts, and he sees the field well. And when they spread the field out more, he can really take advantage of that and break some bigger runs. So I mean, we've certainly seen that variety from him over the last few years, but after some of the injury troubles that he's had, it's certainly nice to see him playing, and I think probably close to his peak level right now.
Yeah, the year has been very good, and he's been a great short yardage player. Certainly got that nose for the goal line. The thing that's bothered me a little bit about his play, and it improved a little bit the last 3 weeks against Seattle and Cincinnati in particular, is that his yards after contact have not been nearly as good as they've been the rest of his career. So career, He's got a 3.20 yards after contact average, and this year it's only 274. He'd never been below 320 in a season previously. So the 274 is what's dragging him down to that. Immediately, as soon as he came into the league, he had amazing yards after contact on runs right up the middle, and that just doesn't seem to be there as much anymore. I would say that the point of attack offense that they had with Roman was much better at getting him second level opportunities for first contact. And generally speaking, defensive linemen have a much lower missed tackle rate than linebackers do, and certainly than safeties or corners do. So anytime you get a guy into level 2 for the first contact, that's a real nice opportunity for them. So I think he's suffered a little bit from that, but by and large, I mean, I just couldn't. I'm 93% as happy with Gus Edwards as I ever was, even though his yards per carry is off this year. We kind of knew that was going to happen with the change in offensive personnel to go into a lot more 11, and even with Ricard playing a lot. It's been Edwards who's completely shouldered the burden in terms of being the back who's in there when the other teams knows the run is coming. So it's been he's had a high share of it in past years, but he's had a share. He's had somebody sharing it with him, and this year it's all him in terms of who's in the game.
Yeah. So who do you want to talk about next?
Let's move on and talk about Rashad Bateman, who I think has a big chance for a breakout over these next few weeks. The rest of the season with Mark Andrews not around, probably a few more targets going to wide receiver. Bateman has shown some outstanding trust characteristics the last few weeks in terms of coming back and picking out the interception, in terms of continuing to work hard all the way through the play, including Lamar's touchdown pass to him in this last game. He's been very good about being a high catch radius player. There's been obviously a couple stumbles this year. The interception where he's on the sidelines, he didn't really seem to make a play on the football, and it got unusually picked off, not by an undercut, but by an overcut from the defensive back. That was unfortunate, but otherwise, I think he's really had a terrific season, and he should be a guy, I think, from this point forward, who really picks up a lot of targets And I hope it's a lot of deep targets. It seems like they're trying to go to him. We talked a little bit in the first show about them being just a little bit off on a deep target in this game.
It feels like he has a big play coming. It feels like it's almost any play now, because as you said, they clearly want to use him in that way. He seems to be consistently getting a step or two on his defender when he does have those opportunities, and you have to think they will get the timing right at some point, and that will be a big moment for him, because he's had a tough couple of years in a lot of different ways, and I mean, he sees himself as that kind of player. So I think for him to have a moment like that to confirm that would be an important thing. And we've seen it happen in practice, and we know he has the ability. We've seen it in games in past years. So I mean, the touchdown was great, but I think it would mean a lot to him to have one of those big strikes, connect. So I guess we can. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me toss in one more Bateman comment here, because I think it would mean not only a lot to him, but a lot to Monken as well, because he's been cast as a route runner a lot in his time with Baltimore, because he certainly is a great route runner. It was what made him a first round pick out of Minnesota. It wasn't his speed, but he's still fast. And the other thing about being a great route runner is you have to show the vertical explosiveness for people to take your wiggle at the top of the route seriously when you want to in cut, when you want to, go make even a post move or a slant and go or whatever you want to do. They got to believe what you're selling at the top of the route in order to give you separation on anything but a vertical route. And that's I think a kind of lost. And I think that may be why they're continuing to try and feed him a little bit there. I don't think they necessarily have to connect with him, but they have to have at least like a pass interference call or another play that's really close and is just missed for some reason get that on tape for other advanced scouts across the league to look at.
And, the Taylor Britt play that we talked about, that you just alluded to, that we talked about in part one, was so close to being that. So yeah, as I said, it kind of feels like it's right there for him. And then I guess we can continue with the wide receiver room, because Odell Beckham Jr. had a big game on Thursday night, and we talked a little bit in part one about the really nice connection that he and Lamar have developed on those kind of timing plays in the middle of the field, with Lamar hitting him in stride, and then Odell really paying that off by getting maybe another 10 or 15 yards after that. Those have been those were some of the biggest plays in the game in terms of getting their offense going on Thursday night. And for those who had started to be skeptical about Beckham, after the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, I do think you're seeing real juice in his legs now. If there was a worry that wasn't there, I do think we saw it on Thursday night. He had the deep play late in the game, but really even before that, I mean, he had the in the 2-minute game, he had the real nice play along the sideline where he makes the catch, but then he spins away from his defender, and then he kind of tight ropes along the sideline, and really puts them in position to finish that drive with a touchdown instead of a field goal. So I do. He's headed in the right direction. I mean, the injuries are always going to be a concern, but if he can help them win a few more big games like Thursday night with plays like that, I think they will consider that a perfectly fine investment.
Yeah, I would agree, and it makes all the difference. The game on Thursday makes all the difference, and if there are a couple more, I'm just about there in terms of the investment paying off, because he's certainly done some things in terms of penalties that have been positive. Very quietly now, and I'm going to be out front of this because I've been a big critic of him in terms of a ski slope of a yards per target career trajectory he's been on, from 10.0 in his rookie year down to 6.4 with LA a couple of years ago, 6.5 overall for that season. Odell Beckham has now, with the big games these last couple of weeks, has got 8.9 yards per target this year. That's a terrific number for a Ravens wide receiver. Very few players in Ravens history, wide receivers in particular, have ever had more. And only a couple of guys have ever reached 10 yards per target. So he won't do that, but it's still exceptional that he's making these big plays, and a lot of it's coming from yak, not just on verticals. So really nice to see him taking advantage of that. I'll stay with the wide receiver room. Let's go to Nelson Aguilar, who had one of the really great tip ball plays you'll ever see. And sometimes it just works out, but you gotta actually collect that football and you think of it as like an interception, but that ball is rotating. It's not spiraling in the normal way. It's end over end pitch and roll. Difficult to break yourself out of that if you're flying a plane thing. Just an incredible, fortunate play there for the Ravens.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it. I mean, we could talk about it being a lucky play. I mean, it was, but he still had to go and make the play, and not only did he catch the ball. I mean, he made the play, went all the way to the end zone, and obviously finished it with a little flair with the somersault. And I guess it felt like a little bit of a cosmic justice because it came right after the Zay 68-yard touchdown got wiped out by the holding penalty. So that was the football gods intervening on the Ravens' behalf, I guess.
There you go. Fair enough. Aguilar now at 10.0 yards per target this year too. Fantastic number and way outperformed my expectations. He'd had a really bad year in a lot of the key metrics for wide receivers, drop rate, yards per target, just a whole bunch of things that he hadn't been good at last year. And maybe it was just a matter of circumstance and the time at New England was not an ideal time for him. But anyway, good player this year and couldn't be happier.
And then I guess we've talked about most of the skill guys, but I know you wanted to talk about Ricard, who didn't play a whole lot in this game. I think only played 25 offensive snaps. But I mean, he continues to be valuable in all the ways that we've seen. But I mean, what did you want to highlight about this game for him?
I guess there were a couple of things. Is that against the Seahawks, when they ran up 298 rushing yards, they only used him 23 times in the game. So it's not like he was the big piece in the run game. They're using him on a fair number of pass plays and, a fair number of run plays too. It's not like he's never out there for run plays, but you'd think it would be more than that when they have a big game like that. And, they ran for 150 this game. He was out there for a fair number of pass plays and some of the run plays, but by no means all of the run plays. And they seem to have found a good happy medium in terms of realizing how important he is to this offense and keeping him around to be important to this offense when they really need that. And also not limiting their receiving options or the Monken defend every blade of grass by having him out there on, a vast majority of early down plays.
And then I think the quiet benefit of that is he's been pretty banged up at this point in the season the last couple of years. And I don't think that he is right now. I mean, and that's maybe a quiet benefit to them using him in a more measured way.
You would know this, but did he have both hips worked on at different times, or was it the same hip twice, or what was it?
Honestly, I can't remember at this point. I mean, I know he's had two separate hip things, but I can't remember if it's both or yeah. I'm not sure. I would have to ask him.
Okay. All right, very cool. Well, maybe we answer a couple of mailbag questions then, since we've got a lot of those skill position players worked out. If you wouldn't mind, go over to to look for hashtag Film Study mailbag, and we'll kind of pick some questions together on this. I got one about the defense I'm going to hit up really quickly here because I thought it was a good question, and oh darn it, now I lost it. Yes. So this is from at South 3RN Fry 3D. Okay. JP, we'll just call you JP, said, should the Ravens go out and try and sign Ndamukong Suh, basically? And should we be worried about the Ravens giving up a lot of yards per carry against the run at this point? Any feeling about either of those? Have you heard anything about Ndamukong Suh still being a hot topic with the Ravens at this point?
No, I have not heard a peep about Ndamukong Suh since that. I mean, I guess that really came from him when there was that news tidbit. I can't even remember how long it's been now. I don't get the sense that that's overly likely. And I mean, the fact that Broderick Washington wasn't active in this game, I mean, I don't know what that says about that, but I mean, I think that they're fairly happy with their frontline guys in that sense. The Michael Pierce and Travis Jones has had a nice year overall. I do think it's sort of a quiet relative weakness for this team. I mean, they haven't their performance against the run hasn't been quite as good as maybe we thought it would be coming into the year. I mean, their defensive performance has been better than we thought it was going to be, I think, in a whole lot of ways, not so much in that way. And, you know, the Bengals sort of came out and went right at them with Mixon and had a lot of success with that in the first half. So, and the Browns had run very effectively against them the week before. So I do think it's a little bit of a worry, but I'm not sure that anybody they're able to go out and get is going to make that much of a difference there.
So let me kind of untie these 2 points, because I think they're similar, but they're not the same thing. So in terms of getting Sue, I kind of like the idea of the Ravens having a sixth defensive lineman active on a regular basis, just because I think whenever you lose a defensive lineman, if you go from 4 to 3, it's disastrous. If you go from 5 to 4, it's dangerous, including if this was by choice for Washington. I look forward to hearing for sure whether this was by choice or if it was a due to some illness or last minute injury or whatever it might have been that they had to make this happen. But the other part about the Ravens run game defense is I really wouldn't be too worried about it. They're giving up 4.5 yards a carry basically when you factor out the kneels. So when you take those out, they're up to 4.5. But they're also giving up 4.18 yards per pass play. I think it's 4.18, might be 4.19 per pass play this year. That is an incredible figure. It is way ahead of the the franchise record of 462 in 1999. And the league averages were about 0.2 of a yard longer in that day for pass plays. So this is a shockingly low number, and it's really a schematic choice they're making. So if they start out of a 2 deep shell and they rotate into all sorts of different things from that, they morph into different things. But when they start with 2 deep, you're daring the other team to run, and they're going to run on you a little bit. And you can run on the Ravens for a while, and then you can't when they get ahead 2 touchdowns or more. In the second half, you got to get back to passing the ball anyway. I think McDonald's been remarkably patient at letting some of this running just happen, with the enormous benefit they've gotten of reducing the roles of their cornerbacks in the defense. So I think that would be how I would answer the question.
Well, and it's interesting that you put it that way, because when I asked Patrick Queen about that after the game on Thursday, that was basically what he said. He said they did a good job starting out the game, attacking what we gave them. We weren't surprised by it, and we were ultimately happy with the way the game played out from a defensive game. Now, I mean, they're always going to be self-critical. They're never going to be happy with any yards they give up, but that answer tells me that you're on the right track with what you're saying about how they're conceiving of the shape of the game.
Yeah. The only run I was really upset with the entire game was the 15-yard run on, I think, 3rd and 18. That was one where really you got to let that up and let them back into the game a little bit on that, and it led to a long garbage time drive, which I'm sure we'd have preferred not to see. But it was just one of those things. I guess I shouldn't lean too heavily on it. Let's see. Do you have another question here you've got up? I can grab the next one if you like.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go to look at the question. So if you could read it.
Okay. No problem. Let me go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry.
The next one is AngeLove85 at Nikki622A says, "Hi Ken, how do you feel about a likely Kolar-Vokalek combo? I feel like Kolar may break out. Also, will we see more wide receiver usage?" Let you take that one first.
Yeah, sure. Well, that is the $64 million question right now, coming off of the news from Thursday night. I would think the majority of the tight end receiving opportunities would go to Likely. I mean, he's the obvious next in line. I mean, he's sort of Andrews' apprentice. I mean, he talked about that on Thursday night when he talked about how much it hurt him to see Andrews hurt like that. I mean, he said, Mark has basically been my big brother on the team in a lot of ways. Whenever I have a question, he's the guy I go to. So, I mean, there's a lot of respect and, emotion tied up in that. And he understands the responsibility that's going to be on his shoulders. At the same time, we talked about it in part one. I mean, there are reasons to question whether how much he's ready to step into that. I mean, he's had really good games filling in for Andrews last year. I think he's had a little bit of a disappointing year to this point. To be fair, has not had a tremendous amount of opportunity. So this is his time to show he can be high level NFL tight end, and we'll see. I mean, we have a good reason to think he has the talent. Kolar, I think, is a much bigger wild card because I mean he had essentially become a fringe player on the team to this point. You know, hadn't done anything I think to force his way into the Ravens' offensive plans. He's going to have more opportunities now. We saw him have one on Thursday night. He was known as a effective possession receiving tight end coming out of college. So you would think he has the tools, but he's gonna have to show it because I mean, he, as I said to this point, and we're not just talking about games where he hasn't had a lot of opportunities, but hasn't done a lot in practice or training camp, I think, to force his way into the Ravens' plans. So yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Let me ask you this. So Travis Vokolek may or may not get, advanced from the practice squad. And we talked about that already. So I don't want to rehash the part about whether they do it via elevation or whether they just add him to the 53. But Eric Tomlinson was on the practice squad until just recently. And in fact, the timing of this is just terrible in terms of him being cut from the practice squad. I don't know if another team has picked him up, but in losing Andrews, the Ravens also lost their best blocker among their tight ends. Is Tomlinson a guy they might come back to, or did you get any sense from maybe your time around the castle that Tomlinson wasn't quite the player that they thought he was anymore in his time in the practice squad, and that maybe had something to do with him being cut?
I don't think that was the reason he got cut. I think that was just a numbers game at other positions. I don't think that was driven by his performance. Certainly didn't get that sense. I could certainly see him being back because he's a guy that they trust. I mean, as a veteran, a guy with a track record of being a very effective blocker wouldn't surprise me at all. How much we'll see him on the field, I'd be a little dubious about that. I mean, I don't know what would have to happen for that to be the case, but certainly would not be surprised to see him back as sort of a reserve, security blanket type option.
Right. I mean, it would be a frustration with Kolar thing, I think, Kolar the blocker, if they were to get Tomlinson on the field. So I would almost think if they did that, if they brought it back, it would almost mean they've kind of made up their mind on Kolar that he's not going to be a long-term option for the club.
Well, and I think this may be his last chance to show that he can be a long-term option for the club. I mean, the opportunity is certainly there for him, but if he doesn't seize it this time, I kind of think they're probably looking to add another long-term option at that position next spring.
I'm with you entirely. By the way, I mean we all know it's a declining 4-year option you have with any player you bring in. That when you draft a player, you've got a declining 4-year option. That's a lot of value initially, but most of that value is in those first 2 years in terms of looking at what the player can become, because there's a ramp up period and they don't usually become good in just a heartbeat from not being good in the first year and hardly playing at all in the second year. And unfortunately, there's other guys on the team in exactly that spot. JAD is in that spot. Ardarius Washington was a guy who looked like he was going to take over that slot corner role and not give it up, and played very well the first week before he got hurt. He's honestly in that same spot. He's going to have to come to camp and earn it again this next year, I'm afraid.
I mean, Falele is kind of in that spot too, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That's a great example.
Yeah.
So, Ben Cleveland is so far past that spot, it's not even funny. But,
right.
But yeah, it's a lot of guys are there's real questions about whether you keep them. And by the way, I always say this, but the easiest article of all of camp to write is talk about possible cuts among 4th-year players, because they're all on the bubble basically when they're on that first deal.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But I guess to finish off that question, though, I mean, we didn't talk about the wide receiver part of making up for Andrews, and I have to think that a lot of the targets are going to go to the wide receivers and not to either of the young tight ends. And maybe, look, there's no way that the Ravens are going to be a better team without Mark Andrews than with Mark Andrews. But if there's any silver lining, maybe it is a spur for Lamar to make more aggressive connections with the wide receivers, to be looking for those opportunities more than he might have when he always knew he could fall back on the connection with Andrews. Again, that doesn't in any way outweigh what you lose, but maybe we see more dynamic relationships with those wide receivers emerge over the next 6 weeks.
That's a great point. Just having him distribute the ball more effectively, which I think he's done pretty well this year. I think he's done a
Yeah.
pretty good job of moving that ball around a little bit. But he's got more with Beckham, more with Flowers, more than Andrews still than the others. And in his time at camp over the years, the connection with Andrews has been clear basically since they first stepped on a field together. That they've wanted to,
No, people who aren't out there every day have no idea. I mean, it is every practice in the summer too. I mean, he's still that's his go-to. I mean, there's no question Mark Andrews is the number one receiver on the team. Yep. I mean, that's the way it is, and that's the way it's going to be.
It's Unitas and Barry had the same kind of relationship, and I know there's some Colt fans who are just rolling over, bothered with that comment, because Barry and Unitas obviously are very special to this town, but it's similar type of relationship. They're just younger at this point, and they still probably have a lot of years together. But there is a question here to that end, and it's back to Angelove85, who says, the Ravens save $5 to $11 million if they cut Mark Andrews next year. So it's $5 million if they cut him early, and it's $11 million if they cut him late. If other tight ends emerge, and given the cap situation and new injury, any thought they might cut Mark next year? No,
I think that's as close to 0% chance as you can get. I mean, he's as core a core player as you can get. His contract is still pretty reasonable relative to the top players at that position, which he clearly is one of those guys when he's healthy. I would be stunned by that. I mean, I think he's one of those guys that they would love it if he was if health allows, if he was a 13, 14 year Raven. I mean, I think they see him as one of those core guys that will be in the Ring of Honor one day, that, will be back, over and over, after his career. I mean, he's one of those guys. So I would be stunned by that.
I would agree with you, by the way, that I don't see that happening. But I'm gonna start with the other tight ends doing. I don't think there's anything the other tight ends could do in a short period of time here in 6 games, even if likely were to pick up 26 receptions over that period of time and 10 yards per reception, that's going to change the long-term view on Mark Andrews. So I don't think it'll be an outside competitor. Likely it would be a great find to have likely all of a sudden play at that level, and that'd be positive. But I think it's all down to, if there's something medically that just cannot be fixed about this injury, then it could be a different thing. And we really haven't heard the extent of the injury yet. So we heard something about a fractured tibia or fibula, I forget which.
I think tibia, but okay. I would have. There was an NFL Network report. I'd have to go back and look at that, and then some sort of ligament damage in the ankle. And you're right. I mean, we've seen injuries that ended up being far more severe than we could have contemplated at the beginning. I mean, you were talking about Bo Jackson in the first part when we were talking about Keaton Mitchell. I mean, he had one of those injuries, right? Where, I mean, it ended up being a real life-changing injury. There's nothing that we know now to say that's the case, but I mean, that's always the 1% possibility, right? But no, I mean, based on the facts that we have now, I have no reason to think that he won't be ready for camp next year and, as essential a part of the team as ever.
Yeah. And the Ravens, obviously, it's Dennis Pitta, still a close part of the organization in terms of broadcasting and whatnot in town, but he's a guy who they went through this with. Right. I would say I don't think the Ravens, with Lamar on his second contract, capping as tight as it would have the kind of patience they did with Pitta with Andrews. And it's not going to be his fault, by the way. I think Pitta wasn't his fault in terms of wanting to get back on the field. He worked like hell to do it. It's just going to be a matter of the patience with the injury specifically that I'm talking about. They may have to at some point cut bait just because of the cap costs. So.
No, and the Pitta was a horrible situation, and everybody felt horrible about it. I mean, as you said it, it's not anyone's fault. It's one of the terrible, subplots of this game. Yeah.
Well, let's go back and do the MVPs for the game. 3, 2, 1. Are you set to do that? You want to do that with me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, we'll start with your number 3 guy then. Who would it be?
Let's see. Number 3, I would go with Gus Edwards.
Okay, good choice. I'll try and be different here, and I'll say I'll go with Tyler Linderbaum and Kevin Zeitler. Cheat a little bit. I think they basically both had fantastic games on the offensive line, and I think those two deserve some credit for what happened in this game.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think number two, you have to lean into Odell Beckham Jr. This was his most productive game as a Raven, his first 100-yard receiving game since the 2021 playoffs, first in the regular season, I think since 2019. As we talked about, we saw some real zip in the legs, with the yak plays, the deep play at the end, started to give us some real hope that they're going to see a major payoff for the contract, and that he can help cover the gap left by Andrews. I mean, he seems to be in a very good place right now with his connection with Lamar.
All right. I think you nailed it all the way on that. I'm not even going to try and add to it. And Beckham is my number two guy as well. I'll go first on the number one guy, since I think we probably have the same guy again as Lamar Jackson. I don't see how you can pick anybody else in a game where he has 120 passer rating. He's really good under pressure, as he was again. And he's doing other things in terms of ball placement that have really helped Beckham, for example, pile up the yak, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And especially in context, the importance of the game, the stage, the fact that he had the scary injury, early in the game, and I think he was probably still playing on somewhat of a tender ankle. I mean, he had the heating pad on the sideline, and yet I don't think that really much limited what he was able to do for the rest of the game. And we didn't talk too much about that injury, but I mean, that was clearly, I think even more than Andrews, was the scariest 2 or 3 minutes of the night, right? Because while he was in that blue tent, the stadium went silent. Everybody saw the season sort of flash before their eyes. So much promise. I mean, we've seen how limited their ultimate prospects are without him. So, and then he came back out and showed why everything they do is so tied to him. So yes, he was the man of the night.
All right. Always great talking football with you, Childs. Just a pleasure, and extremely good knowledge. Really appreciate that you're still at the Sun when a lot of other people have taken their leave for various ventures. Good luck to them, by the way. But happy to still have you in my morning paper. But tell folks where they can read your work online and where they can talk football with you if they have a question for you.
Yeah, you can follow me on X/Twitter at Childs Walker. So I'm there all the time, and then BaltimoreSun.com. Still the place to read everything that I read. You get the 5 things you learned at 5 a.m. the day after every game, and then other pieces throughout the week. So that is where to keep up with me.
Do you have any cool assignments coming up that are maybe non-sports related, or hopefully with the Ravens through the Super Bowl? And then are you going to cover the Orioles? Are you going to do horse racing? What are you doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the Ravens will certainly dominate, as long as they're going. And I mean, they're going to be, arguably the biggest story in town over the next few months. So I mean, that'll be my life until then. I did have fun. I know you're a big Orioles fan, and you get into the analysis of that as well. I mean, I did get a little chance to dip in right at the end of the season and the brief playoff run, which was fun. I mean, I covered baseball many moons ago, and I mean, I grew up in Baltimore, so I grew up as a baseball fan. With the Colts gone, I mean, the Orioles were everything to me. So I mean, baseball was my first love, and it was cool to be able to dive back into that with such a not just a fun team, but an interesting team with everything that's in front of them. So I would hope to be able to do some more Orioles stuff next year, and that's going to be a fun team, I think, for years to come. So we'll see. But as you know, it's always variety for me. So I'm sure it'll be something.
All right. Well, very cool. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. You know the rules by now. Also, to our loyal fans, if you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing when you see this ad on YouTube, and commenting if you like. I'll try and make sure I go out and look at the comments that are out there on YouTube. If you don't mind taking 5 minutes to write a 50-word review on the show, that's always greatly appreciated as well, particularly if you're going to give us 5 stars. I'm sure you could do that on a lot of different platforms, but always appreciate it. Childs, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll look forward to the next time.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.